An absolutely shocking speech from the European Central Bank, which drops several bombshells in its latest address. It is made very clear here, cash is no longer enough. The digital euro is supposed to become mandatory soon. What is being preached here could be the path to abolishing cash across all of Europe, because we know there are already various cash limits in place, and by 2027, a €10,000 cash cap is set to be introduced Europe-wide. Transactions of €3,000 or more are to be monitored so strictly by regulations that it probably won't even be attractive anymore to pay with more than €3,000. And of course, all of this is happening under the guise of fighting money laundering, while the biggest banksters, gangsters, and criminals are all still in office. There's already an official website for this where you can see, for example, the €10,000 cash limit. Then you can select individual countries here. Let's say, for example, we pick Spain, and you'll see the cash limit is €1,000. Then we can, for example, select Italy, and there it's also €1,000. There are other countries where the limit is €5,000. Germany doesn't have a cash limit yet. The emphasis is on yet, and this is the real kicker. Starting at €3,000, you have to identify yourself, basically stripped down completely. For cash range extensions between €3,000 and €10,000, the seller has to ask for identification. And we also know that, by now, there are withdrawal limits at ATMs in places like Spain, set at €3,000. Here, violations can result in fines of up to €100,000. And when the digital euro becomes mandatory, but you're no longer allowed to use cash or only up to €2,000 or €3,000 or something like that, then you basically have a de facto cash ban or a cash limit. And these limits, I'd say, well, they can always be lowered even further, and you really end up pushing yourself into the illegal zone. So we really need to take a close look at all the details of this speech, because it's honestly crazy what's being revealed here. The entire plan of the ECB is just being laid out openly for everyone to see. The speech comes directly from Piero Cipollone of the ECB, and I'm not kidding. ChatGPT says about this speech, I asked for an assessment that this speech is a political masterpiece used to justify a massive centralized financial instrument that's being sold as an innovation, but in reality is meant to create a controllable, manipulable layered money system. They use fear of US corporations, fake arguments about being close to the people, and the narrative of European sovereignty to introduce a system that is completely centralized, surveillable, can be switched off, and threatens our freedom. Just take that in, folks. And make sure to hit that like button for me now. Take just 2 seconds so this really gets into the mainstream, so people understand what's going on here. This is honestly crazy. Also, take 2 seconds. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button so you always get the most relevant info here. The entire speech was published right here on the ECB homepage. Here we see it again, Piero Cipollone. And it's really all about the digital euro and the future of payments. And as we all know, the future of payments, at least in my opinion, is definitely not some kind of forced or mandatory system, but rather something that is voluntary and chosen freely, like Bitcoin or other alternative options if you prefer. And today, the ECB also published an open letter, and it included some really quite bizarre and unusual things like this, for example. They actually write that trust in the ECB is at its highest level in 15 years and support for the euro is at an all-time high. So I really have to ask myself, what kind of statements are these? Could these possibly be fake studies or statistics? As for trust in the euro, I just say, feel free to let me know in the comments how you see it, but I'd say trust in the euro is steadily fading away. Feel free to share your thoughts below, and as for the claim that trust in the ECB is high, I really don't see it that way either, because more and more people are questioning these institutions. That's why Bitcoin exists, that's why there are alternatives, that's why gold is skyrocketing, that's why the price of Bitcoin is going up. Someone here is writing, the euro is at an all-time high, more like an all-time low. And then someone else comments, yeah, you just have to flip the chart, that's the trick with the euro. You can't look at the chart the right way up, you have to turn it around. Because if you compare it to Bitcoin, then of course the euro is in a nosedive. And I've really picked out the most important quotes from this speech by Piero Cipollone. Here it says, legal tender of the digital euro equals cash obligation will be replaced. So they're saying here, the digital euro would have legal tender status, available offline, covering all payment needs. So legal tender also means an obligation to accept it. And if that becomes mandatory, then the real question is, if everything is required to be digital, what's left in cash? That means, what can we still use cash for? Sure, maybe you could use it as an alternative, but as I just told you, the EU is planning to introduce a cash limit of €1,000 for transactions starting in 2027. So that's already set in stone. However, member states are allowed to set lower national limits. It's kind of nice, though, that they're allowed to set even lower limits. Additionally, transactions over €3,000 are supposed to be monitored more strictly, especially as part of anti-money laundering measures. So you can probably expect that there won't be much happening above €3,000, and in many countries, the limits will likely be set even lower. But maybe they want to introduce the digital euro first before they actually lower the limits here. For now, they're leaving a bit of leeway for the digital euro, and then they'll lower the limits. Then, in theory, you're still allowed to pay with cash, but in practice, you end up with such high limits and so many restrictions, such big regulatory hurdles, like it already says here, From 3,000 euros on, there are regulatory hurdles. I mean, if you want to make a cash payment and you have to fill out 5 forms beforehand, or like in Spain, where if you want to withdraw more than 3,000 euros, you have to register 24 hours in advance. I mean, obviously, no one is going to make cash payments anymore. This is clearly all about incentives, about how cash payments are being deliberately undermined here. And in the speech, it was really contradiction after contradiction. For example, Cipollone says in the speech that the digital euro is supposed to reduce our dependence on foreign payment services like PayPal and Apple Pay. So the ECB wants to set up its own alternative here, but keep the same functions, centralized control, access to data, just now under their own control. That means they talk about an alternative, but in reality, there isn't actually an alternative at all. It's exactly the same system, just with a different name, and now the control is in their own hands instead of in American hands. There's nothing decentralized about this. The control is still centrally managed. So they're not solving a problem, they're just nationalizing the problem. Here comes scandal number 2. The digital euro is also supposed to work offline and offer privacy features similar to cash. But here comes the plot twist. If it's digital, then it has to be recorded somewhere. So what exactly is supposed to be cash-like about it? There's no real protection against surveillance, and even here they're already saying cash-like, which leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And the idea that privacy will actually be protected here is probably just a complete smokescreen. But it goes on. Scandal number 3. In this speech, it said, quote, "The people want it after all. Almost half of those surveyed would probably use the digital euro." Yeah, who actually believes that? Well, dude, I don't know, it's just like before, like I already told you. The ECB claims that trust is at an all-time high, that trust in the ECB hasn't been this high in 15 years, that the euro is doing well, and so on. We're always being told that the euro is safe, but it's been in a nosedive this whole time, at least when you adjust for purchasing power compared to hard assets. So in this speech, they're actually using hypothetical approval as justification for a radical, new, potentially surveillable payment system. And even if half the people agree, even if really half the population says, yeah, I think that's good, what about the other half of the population? Does that mean we just leave out the other half somehow? Do we just ignore them? 50% approval just isn't enough here. I think he even said it was only 40% or something like that in one of his speeches. And that's fundamentally different with Bitcoin. There, we need 100% agreement. If you don't agree with the rules, then the rules just don't get changed. Not your node, not your rules. So if you set your own rules with your own node, you can't just be forked out, and that's what a real fork is. Here, we're just being forked out. There's no consensus for this, and it's just being forced on us, and then we're told, yeah, the people want this. Yeah, 50% want this, all-time high in trust, and so on. But that's just nonsense. Here, they're selling you something using fear, panic-mongering, misleading or false data, faulty arguments and pseudo-arguments, something you neither need nor want, and that doesn't help you or make you any freer or anything like that. The only thing that really happens is that control gets nationalized, surveillance gets nationalized, and now you're just not dependent on the US anymore. Instead, you're simply dependent on someone else. Instead, you become dependent on the ECB here. Great, congratulations. Now we have scandal number 4. In the speech, it said that it's about sovereignty, but only against the USA, not against your own citizens. Without sovereign money, there is no sovereignty. So the quotes here were, it's about sovereignty, and without sovereign money, there is no sovereignty. The other thing which I've just added here is that they supposedly want sovereignty, but as I just mentioned, there are certain limits because this sovereignty isn't really meant for the citizens, but rather for the central bank in relation to US service providers. That means there's actually no benefit for you at all. That's always the issue with the digital euro. There's simply no advantage for the user. The only ones who benefit are those in power, and honestly, what's happening here is really insidious. True sovereignty means having your own keys, your own nodes, your own independence, a hardware wallet of your own, where things can't just be censored. I'll also put a link down below to a TREZOR hardware wallet. This way, you can truly be sovereign because real sovereignty means censorship resistance, and that's exactly what you get with your own hardware wallet. With that, you can't just be censored or, let's say, overruled or anything like that, especially if you also have your own node connected. Like I said, I'll put a link below for a hardware wallet, specifically a TREZOR wallet. Highly recommended. You can also use the code BitcoinHotel here, but you need to enter the code BitcoinHotel in lowercase to get the discount. Honestly, I don't even know where to stop with this speech. It actually goes on. Digital euro will be accepted everywhere and be free for basic use. And now the question is, what does basic use actually mean? Once again, they're leaving a lot of room for interpretation. That means if you follow the rules, then you're allowed to use the digital euro, which is more or less mandatory anyway. There are relatively few alternatives. But if your basic use, let's say, gets restricted, maybe because you did something wrong or because you're not conforming to the system. So of course, you could also say, okay, the basic use is available as long as you follow all the rules, but if you don't, then you're excluded from basic use. So that's definitely one way to interpret it, but it really leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Cash is no longer sufficient. We've already talked about that. Cash just isn't enough anymore. We are dependent on the kindness of strangers. And that's kind of crazy because yes, they're dependent on the US and so on strangers, but we as citizens are also dependent on the kindness of the ECB. They can manipulate interest rates at any time, raise or lower them, start quantitative easing, and so on. So, yeah, and trying to push all this through under the banner of sovereignty or something. Look, here, there is no true sovereignty without sovereign money. And then they really want to tell you that the sovereign money we need now is actually Bitcoin. Wait, what am I even saying? Of course, what they actually want to sell you is the digital euro, not Bitcoin. Honestly, guys, I think what's going on here is just wild. Let me know in the comments below how you feel about this. I'll also drop a link to 21 Bitcoin down below. There, you can easily and securely buy Bitcoin. It's a real alternative to the digital euro. Share this video, spread it to your friends. It's important that people here check out what's going on here and see you guys. See you then. Peace out.